All right, mock draft recap here. So, just to explain what I'm going to be doing here, I made a mock draft prior to the draft where I did my best to project where I thought every player was going to go. And it's always difficult to do that for a number of reasons, especially for someone like me who I make YouTube videos for a living, but I do not have any connections like some people do. So I have, I know basically what everyone else knows. But either way, I decided to give a crack at it, and now I figured it could be fun after the draft is over to look back at it. What did I get right and what did I get wrong? So first 8 selections, I technically get every 8 correct in terms of order, although obviously I did not predict the Jaguars-Browns trade, because who would have predicted something like that happening? But ultimately, I was able to get, at least these 8 correctly. I'm not going to take too much of a victory lap, though, because I think most of these were kind of expected. Pretty much everyone thought 1 through 4 was going to go that way. There were some people saying Jacksonville was going to go with Ashton Genty. I never fully bought into those rumors. I always felt like Mason Graham would be the pick at 5, and it was. It was just the Browns who did it. Which meant Genty goes at 6, Membo goes at 7. Number 8 was kind of the first, I feel like, deviation from where I went. McMillan was not the betting favorite when I made my mock draft to go 8, but I just felt like they were going to want to have a receiver for Bryce Young, and I think it was the right call. So that's where I decided to take a little bit of a leap of faith, and I'm glad that it worked out. So far, 8 for 8. It will not stay that way. You see my next few picks, and I mean, these were wildly off. Only one of these picks was correct, although one was only one spot off, but still. Shedeur Sanders at 9. Yeah, I bought in, and I will say, I think by the time the draft actually happened, I made this like a week or a week and a half before the draft came out, or before the draft happened. At that point, the Shedeur Sanders to the Saints rumors were really picking up. By the time the draft actually happened, I was kind of realizing, okay, this is actually not going to happen. But ultimately, hey, this is what I said was going to happen, so I get a swing and a miss there. Yeah, little bit off on that one. Jalen Walker, yeah, I thought the Bears were going to go defense. I don't hate going for Colston Loveland. I think he's a good player, but I definitely thought that's a route they were going to take. I also I thought that the 49ers would go after someone like Jahdae Barron at pick 11 instead of going for Mikael Williams. I thought that getting a good boundary corner would help. I don't know anyone who predicted Tyler Booker going at 12 to the Dallas Cowboys. I thought that they would ultimately go with the wide receiver, Matthew Golden, who many projected would go there. Also, Will Johnson, who, okay, this is another guy who is not a first rounder, who I select in the top 15 of my projections. In fact, 3 different players did not go into first round. He is someone who, again, part of that was injury stuff, though, right? Like, apparently he had a worse injury than people expected. I wonder if he was healthy. Do they make a move like this? Or if they just weren't concerned about the injury, I guess is the better way to phrase it. But ultimately, they decide to, not go that route. The Colts do go Tyler Warren. Kind of felt like one of the more obvious picks just because the teams ahead of him, in theory, didn't need a tight end. The Bears decided to go tight end anyway, but a lot of the teams didn't need tight end or weren't going to value that. Warren was many people's tight end 1 on the board, and we knew the Colts would draft him if he was there at 14. So I got it right, but that was one of the more obvious picks of this draft. Mike Green at 15, he ends up, the NFL did not want to touch that whole situation, so he ends up not getting selected by Atlanta. Atlanta did go edge rusher. In fact, they doubled down on edge rusher, trading back into the first to get one. But yeah, that's where he went. And then Shamar Stewart, he was the pick I mentioned earlier. Went one spot later to the Cincinnati Bengals. The Cardinals did decide to go defensive line. They just went Walter Nolan instead of Shamar Stewart. So I was in the ballpark at least with some of these. Next up, I had Mikael Williams, but they, again, the Bengals went with Shamar Stewart, who was off the board in my mock draft, and they still go edge rushers. So yeah, that's not horrible there. The Seahawks were a weird one, so I gave them Kelvin Banks Jr. Banks was an offensive lineman I really liked, and I liked the move by the Saints to draft him there. It was kind of a situation where they didn't really need a tackle, they needed a guard, so it wasn't a great fit. I just didn't kind of know what to do with Seattle, because I felt like getting a guard there would be reaching for it, and I'm like, are they going to reach for a guard? Well, they quote-unquote reached for a guard. Depends on how much you like Zabel, but that's what they decided to do. The Buccaneers, yeah, I mean, I really thought Jahad Campbell I thought that was one of the more clear locks of this draft class. So when he didn't get selected, I was surprised. I like not Emmanuel, Igmeka Egbuka. I think he could be a good player for them. But yeah, that was a surprise. Amarian Hampton not going with the Broncos. Them selecting Jody Barron, who is well off the board in my expectation. I thought they would go with Hampton, though. Hampton was still on the board. I do wonder if Barron was off the board, would they have gone Hampton? Did they not draft him because, well, they didn't want to draft him with the top 20 pick, or was it just a player they liked more? The Steelers, I correctly called the Steelers weren't going to go quarterback here. There was a lot of talk about the Steelers going with Shedeur Sanders at 21, but even if Sanders was on the board, I would have still not had the Steelers going quarterback here. I just think that they're going with Aaron Rodgers. They feel fine with that. I thought they'd go offensive line, they'd go defensive line, but, neither one was shocking to me there. Colston Loveland then does go at pick 22 to the Chargers in my mock draft. Again, he went way earlier in the real draft. The Chargers went with Hampton, who wasn't on the board. So the player the Chargers got in my draft was off the board in the real draft. The player that the Chargers got in the real draft was off the board in this draft. So where things get a little weird. 23, I had the Packers selecting James Pierce Jr. He goes around this time, just not the Green Bay. They go wide receiver, and they go for wide receiver who was already off the board. If Golden was available, I wonder if I would have given them Golden, But yeah, the Vikings, they decide to go for a guard who I did not have going in the first round. Malachi Starks was my projection here. He, again, goes just a couple spots later in the real draft. 25 is where I projected Gray Zabel to finally go to Houston. I thought for sure they'd want to address the offensive line, and maybe they would have if they didn't have a trade down partner. I did not expect the trade with the Giants, did not expect something like that to happen. Same thing with the Rams. Did not expect a trade, getting a future first for the Atlanta Falcons to get rid of this pick. Well, that's worth it. If you can make that happen. Again, I wonder what they would have done if they were here. Probably not pick Trey Amos, though, because he ended up falling out of the first round and almost out of the second round. Walter Nolan, so I thought he would go a little bit later in this draft class. I like him. I had him going to the Baltimore Ravens at pick 27. Again, they get Malachi Starks, kind of Ravens thing, best player available. I think when I had them getting Walter Nolan, I was just like, well, they'll probably get the best player available. The Detroit Lions, I obviously did not have them drafting Tyreek Williams, as most people did not. I thought they would address the edge rushing room. Instead, Ezeraku falls, pretty further than this as well. So not only did I have them selecting a position they didn't select, but he went later as well. I had Nick Emanuore going at pick 29 to the Commanders, but they decided to get, an offensive lineman who they like. Okay. They want to protect Daniels. I understand it. Still would have liked to see them get another defensive back here, I think, personally. I was surprised they didn't do that. The Bills, and they did take a defensive back. I had them going interior defensive lineman. Granted, Kenneth Grant was well off the board in the real draft. He went at 13. So, again, if Grant's available, what do they decide to do? But I like going with Hairston. I think they made a right call there at pick 30. Obviously, in the real draft, pick 31 and 32 were flip-flopped as the Eagles traded up a spot. But, Chiefs do go offensive line. They decide to go with, I had them going with a guard in this situation, but of course Booker was well off the board. Josh Simmons was, in the real draft. In this draft, Josh Simmons was off the board. So if that was flipped, I probably would have had them going Josh Simmons. Once the real draft came around, I think we all knew Josh Simmons was going at pick 32. And then at pick 32 in this draft, I had Igmeka Egbuka, who in the real draft went to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And then actually kind of weirdly, now that I think about it, I had those two players flipped for Tampa Bay and Philadelphia because the guy I had going to Tampa Bay was who the Eagles drafted, Jahad Campbell. So interesting how that all broke down. I think everyone in the mock drafts was projecting the Eagles to get a defensive lineman, and I did kind of say, don't be so sure of that. They could go some other positions. They're going to get the best player available. That's why I had them going with Egbuka, not because they need a receiver, although they could use a third receiver, but more because he was just the best player on the board. So, again, process was right, but the draft was going to change things up. So as a whole, I mean, a fun exercise. Again, most of the picks once you get to a certain point, are just not going to be right because one little thing changes everything. But I think some interesting, examples of my thought process being correct in most of these areas. Definitely some areas, I'm like, maybe in hindsight, you could have thought of that more. But either way, just kind of a fun video to make. So yeah, those are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.